why you're not getting investors on your cap table. And then from there, go into what the key elements are that you need for your pitch deck to be successful. After that, instead of focusing too much on what doesn't work, I want to deep dive into a couple examples that do work and why. And lastly, we'll end with some questions. Okay, how many of you guys have ran into this exact scenario where you meet an investor at a networking event, or you somehow get their contact info, they're really excited about you, and you follow up, they want to see a deck first before they get on a call with you. You send them the deck, you follow up 3 times, and they don't respond. This is a common occurrence, and it's so sad to me because this one little piece of information can be the thing that stops you from closing your entire round or getting your lead investor. And there are really clear and easy things you can do to stop this from happening. So let's focus really quickly on the key mistakes that people make when they're producing their decks, and then we'll focus on the more important part of what do you do to get people to give you the capital that you need, right? So key mistakes is that it's too wordy. I will say that as in my time in VC, sometimes I would get upwards of 25 to 30 decks a day. And on my 29th deck, I don't want to read, right? Like I need to be able to understand the value of you, your company, and your product, especially at an early stage within the first 1, 2, 3 slides max, right? And I'm not going to be able to go through on a slide that has, you know, a white background and way too many words just to be able to understand what it is that you do. So that, and it's too long, right? This is something you want to only be able to produce enough FOMO. So FOMO is, for those people that don't know, it's fear of missing out. And to do that, you don't actually need to have every single piece of information or detail about your company in these decks. So too long, too much info. There's no such thing as compelling brevity, right? So it's like you need to be able to create this story, craft this story about you, your product, your company that's super compelling, but also really concise, which I think is probably the hardest part about all of this. Number 2, your market analysis doesn't make sense. And I see this a lot, and we'll go into what does make sense in a bit. But the key indicators here for an investor is how big is your market, right? And are you the people that are able to tap into it? And if you aren't able to showcase your understanding of the market that you're trying to tap in, it's a red flag to investors. Number 3 is you don't know your audience, right? So this isn't, you're not doing a sales pitch. This isn't, you trying to get people on your team. You want to speak the language of investors, right? So what that looks like is dollar signs, statistics, and making it clear, concise, and compelling. Number 4 is that your team looks weak. And what I mean by that is you're not showcasing the valuable attributes that an investor would want to see in your team, right? If you worked at Uber, but you're now trying to build a healthcare company, while that experience is great, it's not necessarily relevant. And the way you can also ramp up your team in these slides is by producing a story that makes it seem like you're an expert in this field, right? Number 5 is not understanding your competitors. I see a lot that people say they have no competitors. And while that might be sneaky, you want people to, again, understand that you're super adept in your market. And number 6, especially in the markets that we have right now, it's not that there's a lack of capital out there. There is just more scarcity, right? People are holding on to their dry powder. So you really want to put the pressure on the why now. And if they don't invest today, they're missing out on a potential decacorn opportunity. At the end of the day, that's what they're really invested in. And I want to just focus really quickly about the time compared. I think this next stat that I'll be showing is from 2021 to 2022, but the time overall that venture firms have been spending on decks has gone down significantly. So we can see really quickly that overall time spent reviewing pitch decks has gone down 24%. And then when we look at the unsuccessful decks, people are getting really good. It's either good or they're just too overwhelmed with the amount of decks that they get, that they are just skimming through, right? Like I mentioned, by the time I get to slide 3, I basically know whether or not I want to continue to move on with the rest of the slide deck and then bringing them on for a call. So just thought these were helpful stats. So into the things that I think are actually really helpful. Key elements. We want to keep it concise and clean and engaging, right? So that looks like 10 to 13 pages max. Again, I want to emphasize that this is only produced to produce FOMO. This isn't, giving them in-depth financials. You really just want to get them to have enough interest and not really give them anything for them to say no to, right? If you give them too much, they might be able to find some holes in your go-to-market strategy or whatever it is, and they actually don't take that call. So I'll just talk about these really quickly and then go into some examples. One is your mission. So mission is actually just your title slide. And your title slide is basically setting the scene for your entire pitch deck. And what that looks like is maybe 5 words max about who you are, what you do, and who you do it for. Got it. And number 2 is the problem, right? So the way that I look at the problem is in 2 pieces. You want to talk about how large this problem is overall, so an umbrella of the problem, because number 1, that hints at how big the market is and how big the problem is. And then part 2 of the problem is actually going into more depth about what these in-depth pieces of the problem are that you will be solving. So problem and solution are actually directly tied in together. With those subset of problems, your solution will speak directly to those subset of problems that you're solving. So you're kind of teeing it all up. 4 is the why now. Again, this is the urgency. And I will say here that there is some flexibility in the structure of these slides in terms of what goes first, but generally why now I like to put up higher and higher in the queue. And then 5 is your target market and opportunity. This is where I see a lot of folks kind of stumble. And I'm happy to share after this call any resources that might be helpful in creating something called your TAM, SAM, SOM. This is where you get to explain that you're a master of understanding this market. Number 6 is your business model. I will preface that your business model is likely to change and likely to iterate, especially if you're in pre-seed, seed, right? But you want to be able to basically back up your team by showcasing that you've put in a lot of thought and you're knowledgeable in this space, thinking about how this is going to be able to grow and scale. 7 is traction validation. When I say traction validation, people are normally like, well, Melanie, I don't have any numbers to show for it, right? Like maybe you're pre-revenue. And I say, well, I bet you do. It doesn't necessarily have to be revenue to be able to show the traction validation. This can look like market research. This can look like beta testing. This can look like LOIs. This can look like feedback from potential customers, right? So this is just to show anything that you have to the investor that like, okay, this is actually something that's going to work and people will buy. Number 8 is your competitive landscape. We'll kind of jump into that later and what that can look like. Number 9 is your team. And again, this is an opportunity for you to showcase the relevant experience and how it directly relates to what you're doing with this exact company. And number 10 is your investment and use of funds. We'll jump into this for some examples in a second, but it's really important that you showcase to an investor if you're asking them for, 4 million, why exactly, down to the, $100,000 here, $500,000 there. How are you going to be able to use it? And how is it going to take you from pre-revenue to $100 million in revenue? So again, this is just kind of prefacing 2 things, right? At the earliest stage, your company needs to prove exactly 2 things. 1, that you can build a venture scale business in this market. So that goes back to talking about, your market analysis, and also that you're a master of your craft, right? Like this is your opportunity to showcase to an investor that you know more than them, right? You are the person who is building this company because you know what you're doing and you're doing it for a reason. And that's where number 2 comes in, right? Is this the right team to build that business? And when I say that, like, yes, the founder slide is important, but it's less so about the founder slide and how you're proving your knowledge prior to even getting to that founder slide, right? And you can weave that in before you say, we've worked at the top SaaS companies in the country. People will probably already guess that by the time they get to their founder slide on slide 11 or whatever. Okay, cool. So now we're going to jump into some examples. I'm going to start with a company called Suppleful. and just explain why I think these slides work, and honestly give a couple pieces of feedback for what doesn't work in some of these scenarios. So this is a company called Suppleful. They're a consumer packaged goods company. And I just want to talk really quickly about how simple this title slide is, right? Like, I'm able to see kind of an idea of what it is that they do. They don't just have a bunch of swirly designs on the right side. It's like, okay, I don't even have to read anything to really understand that it's about some type of consumer good, right? And on the bottom here, underneath Suppleful, they tell you in very few words what they're doing, who they're doing it for, and why they're different, right? So just being able to set the context so that an investor, when they're on slide or deck 29 of the day, they're like, great, awesome, I know what I'm getting into. Next slide. Again, this is kind of another opportunity for setting context, not necessarily jumping into the problem right away, but he's getting the investors prepared to understand why this doesn't work. So what works for Mr. Beast, which, by the way, I only found out recently who this man is. He's a popular person on YouTube who ends up giving away like millions to people online, and has produced this really awesome brand because he's a celebrity. But for the long tail of creators, it's very hard, right? So I also want to touch on the fact that this slide looks so simple that it almost seems dumb to me, right? Like, there are only 3 things here, but if you can take a step back for a minute and remember that most founders are looking at their company like this with their heads in the sand, to be able to come at it and look at your problem from a bird's eye point of view and come down to just 3 major things is actually incredibly difficult. So please take a minute to look at how stupidly simple these statements are. And I'm not really left with a lot of questions, right? I'm eager to know, okay, awesome, I see these pain points, right? And I want to learn more. And I also want to show you that the last slide, right? I won't go back, but the last slide had these 3 sets of problems, and then the solution directly ties back into the problems that were stated on the slide before. This isn't an opportunity for you to go into, your deep dive into your product. I can't tell you the amount of people that have sent me their decks, and it's, 12 slides of how their AI works. And they haven't shown me after, slide 17, how much money they can make us over the course of 5 years. I love this. Their why now is up pretty early here. And again, at the very beginning of your company, you just want to continue to hint at the market. Like, this is how big the opportunity is. This is how big the opportunity is. Just keep kind of throwing it in their face in different ways that they would be silly not to invest now because there's all of this opportunity, right? So I will also say too that they're putting in numbers. So 60% of creators, 120 million, continuing to hint at the market, right, are constantly looking for new monetization opportunities. And they've made this increasingly simple, right? So however you can make it seem to the investor that if they don't give you the money now, they're more likely to invest. Okay, great. So here is an example of a TAM, SAM, SOM. Your TAM is called a total addressable market, SAM, serviceable addressable market, and SOM, your serviceable obtainable market. So this analysis is basically an opportunity for you to showcase how large this untapped market is. And I see a lot of people who, again, I'm sorry, this is a little bit blurry, but their TAM is $100 trillion or something absolutely absurd. And to the right of it, there's no explanation as to how they got that number. If I ever see anything that's like more than a couple hundred billion, I automatically assume that they haven't done it correctly because there's not an explanation to these numbers. And what they give you up here is they're trying to explain how large the problem is, right? So 200 million creators globally, and 60% need solutions to monetize their content. And then they break it down how they're getting into their market analysis bit by bit through their market opportunity. So I love this slide. It doesn't leave an investor guessing that you've done this correctly or not correctly. This is how it works. I would actually probably relabel this and just, talk about like just that this is their product slide. It doesn't necessarily explain in depth how it works, but I think it does a good job at high level explaining incredibly simply, this is what we do and this is what we turn it into. So again, it's just the simplicity in trying to explain the value of your product is so important. So perfect. So this is again hinting at what they're planning to do over the next 18 months, right? And this will likely tie into their ask later on. So these are their 3 main revenue drivers. This is how they're planning to go and obtain all this capital, right? And it signals to the investor that they've thought about this and that they know what they're doing in their space. So I love it. It's super simple. I'm not left with a lot of questions. So this is the competition slide. I personally look at these XY axis competition slides and my mind kind of just blows up because it's so much to look at and it's not simple, right? Like there's so many players going on in this space. I think there's a way more simple way to do this. One is that chart where you have a couple things on the left-hand side for what you do compared to what other people don't do with check marks. I prefer that one. I think another way to do this for just an email deck is saying like, we're the only company, or we're the first company to do that does X to do Y for Z group. Unless you're like a company called Tuber, right? And you're competing with Uber and Lyft. I think it kind of can hint to the investor about how large this market is. Yeah. Okay, lastly, I love this slide. If you can showcase to an investor that there are people who have successfully done what you've done, just in a different sector, a different vertical, that really shows to them that, okay, this is definitely in demand, and there's room for the market for this to expand the way that something like Printful did or Printify did. So if you can find those examples and throw them in these decks, super valuable. And it also shows that you've done your homework as well. Okay, here's the team slide. While this isn't my favorite for sure, I think that they can kind of better explain like business operations doing what, right? Digital marketer doing what? How exactly does it tie into their specific business model? I do love how it says up at the top, we have been creators ourselves. We built and exited Graphomap in 5 years without external financing. To me, that signals that they are able to scale something without necessarily having to take on capital, which is something that's really hard to do, which also means they'll likely be really good with the capital that they get. But I'd like to see a little bit more information instead of just their LinkedIn's associated. That gives me more context as to how they're the people to actually take this to the next step. And then your financial models. I love that they have down here that, what's going to be happening over the next course of, Q2, Q3, Q4. I love to see something called milestones as well. If you are, your beachhead is a certain market, or you're starting with one product, right? But that's not the end goal. Talking about that in terms of milestones is incredibly helpful. So you're not hinting to the investor. You don't want to hint to the investor that you're biting off more than you can chew. But if you can kind of showcase the progression of what you're doing and what's going to happen at the end of it, it's tremendously helpful and breaks it down in a way that doesn't make them seem like you're going crazy. Okay, I love this slide. This slide shows exactly what they're doing and what the end result is going to be with the capital that they get, right? And they've broken it down into the exact numbers that they plan on using to get there. It also talks more about their go-to-market strategy, right? Which they don't have a GTM slide on here, but it's important to, again, continue to validate that you are the people who you are the people to do this based off of your knowledge of the market and your industry. Okay, so that was Suppleful. Now I'm going to jump into a deck that I think is even more simple. This company is called Reflect.
Mel, can I jump in for a sec?
Of course. Yeah, please do.
I just want to double click on this idea of simplicity, of clear, concise, and compelling, because what we see over and over again at Fulcrum is we get to the third slide of a deck and we still don't know what it is this company does, or we have an idea, but we're confused. And what you'll see in these decks that Mel, you chose, is they're so simple and they're like pared down. And I think a lot of founders think that that's easier. It's somehow easier to include less information. But what we know from working with founders is like, it's actually a lot harder. It's way harder to take away everything that isn't the essence of what you're doing and just present a super simple reflection of what you're doing and why the investor should care. So I just wanted to double click on that as we go into the second one, which I think you chose. It's a great choice because it is also just so simple and pared down.
Yeah, it's very simple. I mean, even when I, created my own website, I got stuck on like, okay, well, how do I explain what I do? Like when you're the person doing it, it's so much harder to come at it from a bird's eye point of view and showcase the value of what you're doing in 3 bullet points, right?
Yeah, and it's so easy for people on the outside to see a confusing deck and be like, I'm confused, I don't get it. But then the founders are often like, no, but that's important. We need to put that detail in because X, Y, Z. And it's so easy for us to see like, no, nobody cares until they know what you're doing and how big of a market opportunity it's going to be for them. Like nobody cares. So it's just part of the reality of being an entrepreneur and being in the weeds, or conversely being on the outside and being able to offer that perspective. So
totally.
Right. Just wanted to double click on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Super, super great. So this one is even simpler. There are some things that I think are definitely lacking. It's incredibly simplified, but I think it's an awesome example for how you can create a significant amount of impact with as little words as possible. So reimagining in-person therapy through data. Awesome. Set the scene. Sounds good. This is probably my most favorite slide that I have ever seen. If the goal of an email deck is to be able to produce, is to be able to have the investor go on to the next slide and want to continue to learn more, I want to do that with this slide, right? Like probably the majority of Americans have some semblance of anxiety, and likely so do investors, right? So that was a very simple part A to their problem, right? And then again, when I talk about those subset of problems, now they get into the weeds for what exactly they're solving. So people have anxiety and it's too hard to get help, right? 80% don't find the right therapist, and 1 is the number of sessions per person. They also continue to hint at the market here, right? The more you can throw about, I understand the market, I understand the market. I know it sounds like I just keep telling you guys that over and over again, but again, it's harder to do when it's not you who's doing it. Being able to say that there's this amount of capital lost is signaling to me that they have an awesome opportunity here to disrupt it and be able to save X amount of capital. And so this is what they do, in-person therapy driven by data. With what, I don't know, less than 15 words in total on the slide. They have a network of top therapists, data-driven matching, and feedback between sessions. Again, throwing in as much data as possible here. And when I say data, I don't necessarily mean revenue, right? Like they're speaking here, they have a 90% success rate. That could have been from beta testing. It could have been from whatever, you know what I mean? So it's just continuing to showcase with numbers to an investor that what you're doing will be successful. Love this slide. With Reflect, you get better therapy relationships. With Reflect, you go for 7 months instead of 1 month. When I look at this too, I think of awesome, that's recurring revenue, right? 7 months with Reflect compared to whatever you're doing with teletherapy, it's continuing to hint that what they're doing is going to be successful. This is like the most simple recurring revenue model slide I think I've ever seen. I would like to know more about their financials here, but I'm able to see the value of what they're doing and how simple it is. And this is great. Significant traction in the Bay Area. If you have traction, fantastic. Monthly growth. Again, you're able to kind of utilize these numbers to your benefit. Let's say, you're only 6 months old and you might not have revenue, but your beta testing saw 180%, growth over the past 3 months or whatever. You can use these stats to tell the story to your advantage. I like this slide. I think what I like most about this is that they're putting in down here where they've worked and not necessarily who's worked where. So I'm kind of left guessing. What I'm not seeing is how all of this directly relates back to what they're building, right? So it's not saying that, you know, Jonathan got his PhD at Stanford in, you know, in psychology or whatever. It's kind of, it's expansive, but not close enough. I think this is a very cute slide because they utilize their branding. Let's reflect. And this is just an awesome way to kind of tie up your email deck and leave them with something that will have lasting impact, right? 7x length versus therapy, $50,000 in monthly bookings, and 20% monthly growth. As an investor, I see this and I'm excited. I would want to book a call with you. So this was taken from TechCrunch, and I just want to end with kind of just slamming this into you guys, that when you weave a compelling narrative in numbers, you're talking the language of venture capital, and numbers are king. And so many people, when they're seed or pre-seed, get so hung up on the fact that maybe they don't have a lot of revenue, but it's not necessarily about the amount of revenue that you have or don't have, but the way you utilize all these other different slides and the statistics that you can weave in there to be able to produce a story that an investor's mind will stick. And really at the end of the day, it's like, how much money can you make me? Even if they're, you know, climate or impact or whatever, it's all based on returns. So if you can play that game and produce a story that speaks to them, you're, you know, 100 times more likely to be able to get the capital that you need. So I'll stop here really quickly before we move on and just answer some questions. I'm sure it looks like we have 26 questions in the chat. So Will, do you want to call on some people?
Yeah, so if you've got a question, please toss it in the chat. I saw a hand up. Anitha, I saw you had your hand up. So let's call on you first. What's your question?
Well, it had to do with one of the comments you made about we need to show what can, you know, that we can scale from like pre-revenue to 100 million or something, that comment. But there's a slide there about traction. So I have traction in terms of usage because I've built a platform, but I mean, most of it I had to do for free and I didn't get money. So is that still a valid thing? I mean, it's not in the millions, it's only in like the few hundreds, but like but the product is completely built. So that's my issue with the traction slide. People want to see how much revenue have you made, have you revenue, but I'm still pre-revenue.
Yeah,
totally.
So traction pre-revenue. How do you highlight it? How do you highlight traction when you don't have revenue, Mel?
Yeah, definitely.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to that last slide that I showed, right, is you can still speak to this in numbers, right, without necessarily having capital, having revenue coming through, right? So however monthly users you have, you can utilize that data to be like, look, in Q1, we had this amount of users. Over the course of the past 2 months, we've had 120% growth, right? And also comparing yourself to other people in the market. Like, look, this is where they were at their early stage or doing something similar, and this is how much bigger our market is. So when I drive home the idea of utilizing statistics and data and numbers, that's what I mean. Because a lot of people, I mean, we mainly work with pre-seed, seed, some Series A, but it's a lot of them are a little bit of revenue or pre-seed. And then it's also just looking at your financial projections and the way it all intertwines together, right? Like your financial projections go back to your go-to-market strategy. Can you, right, with the way that you're doing this and your unit economics and your business model, signal to the investor that in 5 years, while you don't have revenue right now, it can be 500 million. That's what I hope that clears that up.
Okay, thank you.
I have another, just to add onto that. Sometimes you're building a business that's not going to be a $100 million business. Maybe it's going to be a $10 million business, and you're going to raise money from angels, and you're going to give those angels like a 5 or 10x return. So in that case, if that's your plan, then you want to tell the story that's consistent with that plan. And one of the things that we end up working with founders a lot is, okay, what is your vision and what's your plan? And then how do we tell the story so that we identify the right people who are going to be the right investors to invest in that plan, and then tell the story in a way that's really compelling to them. So it's like you were saying, Mel, you want to identify your audience and then tell the story that's going to resonate with your audience. So that could be like pre-seed venture capital investors, or it could be Series A venture capital investors, or it could be angel groups in your local area that you're going to raise like a $500,000 pre-seed round from. What's the story that they want to hear, and how do we tell that story so that when they hear it, they're like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. I've been looking for one of these, and so I'm going to dig in. And it's a funny thing to think about, because most of us think about, as founders, we're going to give the whole story of our company and the whole big picture, but really you're just wanting to tell the story that your target investors want to hear, so that they dig in and get the opportunity to meet you and start to build conviction about how you're going to execute on that story and make it real. So I think that's often misunderstood. Anything to add to that, Mel?
No, I think I'll share a case study after this about how the support in creating a deck is so much more than creating a deck and the way that we tackle it. But I'll allude to that now and then touch on it in a second once we kind of move on. But let's take a couple more questions, Will.
Cool. Let's see what else we got here. So would love help on the, would love help. Our pitch deck, this is Karen, our pitch and deck are compelling, but we need to somehow add the history of the company, why it's taken us so long to get where we are, because we don't want that issue becoming the why haven't we grown quickly, like the competitors who raised a lot of money from day one. So, okay, a company that's been around for a while, been figuring it out. What's your advice, Mel, on telling that story? Should that be even touched on in the email deck, or what do you think?
I mean, I think I would love to learn more, definitely. I think this is an opportunity to kind of pull in that milestone slide that I was talking about, where, you know, you can have Q1 of 2020, we had like, you know, business model prepared, product launched, and then COVID hit. And we were doing retail SaaS or something like that, right? Something that was really impacted by COVID. And then Q2 2021, you guys produced something totally different. You pivoted into a healthcare app or something that if you can prove, the other thing about like proving that you're the founders to do this, investors love that you can iterate. Like it shows that you can continue a little, that's hilarious. Okay, you were doing retail and CPG SaaS. Exactly. That would be hard to continue to scale and grow in COVID or whatever it is. And if you can be like, all right, this didn't work, but look, we've pivoted 2 other times and we've been able to produce X results in what we've done. To me, that's a super compelling argument. You're able to continue to iterate on something that wasn't working and turn it into something that is. Maybe you don't have revenue, but whatever those stats are that we kind of talked about before that you can pull in and why it is working is awesome. I think some of the most like successful companies started out with one thing. Like Uber was like a taxi driving service. Like they would literally have to go pick up the phone. It was a mess, right? And it's like, okay, this isn't working. How do we iterate? It's like the most important thing. So I think more power to you.
Yeah, I think Twitter started as something completely different. It was like a music link sharing something. Yeah. So there's lots of stories about companies that started off one way and did that for years and then pivoted, and that's when it caught a fire. Okay, Sumit says, can you speak about the differences in email deck and in presentation deck? Yeah. More details, largely structure and story remains the same?
Sorry, I'm also just looking through the questions. Ash, you'll be next. I see that you have your hand raised. So in terms of the email deck and the presentation deck, the email deck is the hardest to make because you have to consolidate in a way that's clear, concise, and compelling the value of your product so that an investor will then book a call with you. That's the whole point. So you can get into the room and then pitch them. The presentation deck can have it doesn't need to have as many words. Maybe you have a picture of your product behind you. Maybe you have just some images that help you tell the story. You actually don't want an investor reading the slides behind you. You want them focused on you. So you can kind of bring that like, you know, boss CEO energy and prove to them once you're in the room, like, I'm the person to do this. So if you can have some supplemental images behind you, I think that's awesome. But the email deck is where you want to kind of slide in all that information. Sorry, Ash.
Yeah, Ash was next. Yeah.
Hey, Melanie and Will, thank you very much for the insights. It's great insights to actually get an idea of what goes in the investor's mind, right? So adding to this, this is more related to the Fulcrum's process. Like, I know that pitch deck, itself actually not going to fly by itself. So like, what is the process of actually making the pitch deck to getting the round funded at Fulcrum?
Do we want to touch on that right now, Will, or come back to that in a second?
Well, I think this is a great segue into.
Okay.
So basically, great. Thank you, Ash, for asking that question. We've developed a service around this because essentially I got tired of looking at ugly pitch decks and pitch decks that I couldn't understand. And it was just like grating on my soul because we get these great companies and great founders, and then the pitch deck wouldn't communicate the opportunity in a way that was going to resonate with investors. So it's like a little bit of heartbreak every time because we'd say to ourselves, we love this founder, we love this opportunity in this business, but they're not going to succeed at raising money unless they overhaul their storytelling and their deck. And so inside our fundraising mastery accelerator program, we touch a bit on this, but we don't actually lead the founders through the process of creating their deck and telling their story by the hand. So a few weeks ago, I said to Mel, hey, we should really beef out this as an offer and have this be something that we offer our founders so that if folks are ready to just have this done by a professional, we can work with founders and get it done. And then we won't see any more ugly pitch decks and we won't have that heartbreak and founders will get through to the next step. So Mel has designed something around this, and I think this is a great segue. So Mel, I think I'll.
And like when we say ugly pitch decks, again, I'm a graphic designer. I got to figure out another way to say who I am, because while I create these pitch decks and they're beautiful, that is not the inherent value that I bring, right? And so let me touch on an example that I was emphasizing before for a case study of someone that we're working with today. We have someone who has an awesome SaaS model for they basically want to be the pre-accelerator for startups. And they have this awesome idea, a killer story. But at the end of the day, I got to their financial side and it was like, we'll make investors 40 million by the end of year 5. And they want a significant amount of funding. And I'll make that tweak, right? Because if you only are going to make 40 million by the end of year 5 and you're going for angel funding, cool, we'll work with that. But the expertise that I bring is like, hey, that actually, I don't think that will get you invested with the way we're looking at it. What if instead of focusing on one vertical, right, for this pre-accelerator, we focus on 4, right? Similar to what Techstars was at the beginning. And we can utilize that messaging to be able to showcase the story of while we start in this sector, we'll actually be adding these 3 over the course of 5 years, which now equates, after working with him on the math and the business plan, to over 500 million in revenue by year 5. That is not something that you're going to get when you go online and you go and ask for pitch deck support, right? So this is totally different. It's like Will and I have had this awesome partnership of being able to support founders who come in and like are really excited and eager to go and launch their startup, or that they have the capital and they have the revenue, they just want to go and scale. But there are these missing pieces for early stage founders or first time founders that are really necessary to have that support. And so that will segue me into the value of what we do. And Will made me put this together. But I'm not a deck designer, right? Like Will is not a coach. Like that's not what we are. What we do is we help people get funded based off of the massive expertise and value that we bring. While my decks are beautiful, really, it's like I am all 7 of these things, right? So when we work together to produce a deck, we get coaching sessions where I'm able to kind of help you refine and iterate on your business plan and figure out what works and doesn't work, right? Deck design service, if that were it, maybe $1,500, right? But when you get feedback and review from the lens of an investor, and you get storyline development from an investor's perspective, from someone who's reviewed hundreds of decks and has said yes or no to different people coming into the room, like that is 10x the value, right? And then offering, of course, like the business plan advisory and review. Something that we're also offering with this service today too is this like quick pitch storyline framework and questionnaire kickoff to make this a more collaborative and learning experience for you guys. And in total, it's like, this is worth, 20 grand. And at the end of the day, it's like kind of invaluable for getting all of these things to then go and get you funded. Like I've helped people raise 500 million since leaving venture. Like what I do works. That being said, I'm not asking for 20 grand today. Normally what I charge, because obviously we work with pre-seed and seed companies, is $6,500 for this service. Based off of all of those critical pieces of information of me, yes, being a deck designer, but really it's about the inherent value of what we can do for your business while telling that story. So today what I'm offering is for the next, 10 people over the next 24 hours, it's only $4,500, and you can book with, I believe, Gary. I don't want to open up the chat right now. Let's see. To either schedule with him over the next 24 hours. If you guys, have seen the value and you want to book with me and get started on this like tomorrow or the next day, or you can buy this right now. I think we'll pop that link in the chat. If you'd like to learn more and kind of understand more about my process, something I will add is that I promise a 2-week turnaround time, which is kind of unheard of in terms of going from business plan iteration to storyline development to then producing a finalized version within 14 days. So yeah, anything to add to that, Will?
Yeah, I think this is an incredible deal. Thank you for offering this discount and this service, Mel, and putting it all together. I think it's super valuable. I'm really excited for people to take advantage of it. If anybody's ready to go, if you're like, yes, this is for me, I just want to hand this over to the experts and get this done for me, I put a link in the chat there so you can